All right, so friends, what we're going to be talking about in just a moment and doing some practice work in is what's called an enthymeme, okay? And I'll let you read about that in just a moment. But an enthymeme is a syllogism that leaves one statement unstated, okay? Now, Wilder, nothing I've said requires calculation. So an enthymeme is a syllogism with one statement left unstated. So for example, you aren't my friend because all my friends own sports cars. Now that is an argument, right? It's an argument. We see our sort of premise keyword here, but how many statements are on the board right now? Two. In order for this to be a syllogism, we need 3 statements. So the person who said this, which of course is not me, I love all of you, though none of you own sports cars. The person who said this is leaving a statement unstated. And so what we have to learn how to do in real life is take things like this, put those statements in categorical form, and figure out which premise is missing. I think you'll see as the third period class that this is not an overly complicated process. Here's the one big rule. You ever heard that expression like assume the best about someone? When we're doing enthymemes, we want to come up with a syllogism that is valid. So even if the person we're arguing with, that we're debating with, even if we disagree with their conclusion, if we're going to sort of draw out their unstated premise, we want to make it so that the resulting syllogism is valid. So keep that in mind as we're working in class and as you're doing homework. Your goal with an enthymeme is to create a valid syllogism. Even if it's an argument like this, that you're like, that's gross, what a shallow materialistic person, we still want to make this valid. Okay, so let me show you how this works. You aren't my friend because all my friends own sports cars. What is the conclusion of this argument? Sellers? You aren't my friend. Okay? Sellers knows that because he sees the word because, which is a premise indicator word. Therefore, the statement before that is the conclusion. Now, you aren't my friend is not a categorical statement. So let's ask a couple of questions here. Is this a universal or a particular statement?
Universal.
It's a universal. Okay? Is it affirmative or negative, Drake?
Negative.
It's negative. Okay? So put this in categorical form for me, Drake.
No, you are my friend.
No, you are my friend. Okay? No, you are my friend. Okay? So the conclusion of this horrible, shallow argument is no, you are my friend. Okay? Now, from doing the conclusion, I get 2 very important pieces of information. I get the minor term, you, and I get the major term, my friend. Now let's look at the other statement. All my friends own sports cars. Which premise is that?
The major.
It's the major premise. Why did you say that, Sam?
Because it has my friend in there.
It has my friend. Okay? So Sam, put this in categorical form for me.
All my friends are sports car owners.
All my friends are, we could say sports car owners or owners of sports cars. Let's say sports car owners. Sports car owners. So what do we have so far? We have an A blank E. Now remember, I said the number one goal here is that we make this syllogism valid. So what 2 statements do we know cannot go as the minor premise? Bean?
An A9.
Why not, Bean?
Because that would make it invalid because that make two affirmative premises.
So that if I did an A or an I, it would give me 2 affirmative premises and a negative conclusion, and that's a fallacy. So we know that this has to be an E or this has to be an O. Now we can also figure out some other things. What's the middle term of this argument?
Sports car owners.
Sports car owners. Now, sports car owners and you have to be in this either A or an I. But what do you notice about where sports car owner is in this major premise? Is it distributed or undistributed? It's undistributed, which means whatever statement we choose, A or I, sports car owner has to be distributed. Well, what does that mean the minor premise is going to be, Bean?
It means the minor premise is going to be
Sorry, go ahead. You're right.
and minor premise is going to be E.
So what does this need to be?
It needs to be no.
Now, Beam is thinking about what should come first, you or sports car owner, but what do we know about E statements? Weaver?
Both terms are distributed.
So, but what do we know from doing converses with E's?
They can be.
It doesn't matter which one you put first. In E's and I's, it doesn't matter which one you put first because the subject and the predicate are interchangeable. So, Beam, follow your heart. Which one do you want to say first?
No, you are sports car.
No, you are sports car owners. Now, let's take a look. Remember, our goal is that we would have a valid syllogism. So, let's do our little question and answer dance. Is the middle term distributed in at least one premise?
Yes.
Are there any distributed terms in conclusion?
Yes.
Are they distributed in their premise?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have two negative premises?
No.
Do I have a negative premise with two affirmative conclusions?
No.
Nope. So this syllogism, this A, E, E, 2, is valid. Okay? That's how you do an enthymeme. That's how you do an enthymeme. So let's do 5 more enthymemes on page 223. So page 223, your homework tonight is going to be exactly like this. We're going to do 5 of these, and then you'll do 5 for your homework tonight. So paying attention here will make your life much simpler this evening. So enthymemes are arguments with one premise left unstated. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look. I'm on page 223. And I'll just pick on Sellers. He looks like he's particularly prepared for this. So Sellers, read number 1 for us on page 223 as it's written.
Tomorrow is not Tuesday, therefore tomorrow we will not have a test.
Okay? So Sellers, as it's written, what is the conclusion?
Tomorrow we will not have a test.
Tomorrow we will not have a test. Okay? Is that in categorical form?
No.
Okay. Is that a universal or a particular statement? Is it affirmative or negative?
Negative.
Okay, can you put that into categorical form for me?
No, we will have a test tomorrow.
Well, is it talking about we? Is the subject we or is the subject what? What's the subject?
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow. So try that again.
Tomorrow is a test. Ever?
Well, not test haver, but no, tomorrow is a test day. Okay? Is a test day. Now, you could have said, no, tomorrow is a day that has a test, but much simpler to say, no, tomorrow is a test day. Okay, Sellers, now we know our minor term and our major term. So did they give us the major premise or the minor premise in tomorrow is not Tuesday?
Minor.
It's the minor. Okay, is that an affirmative? Sorry, is that a universal or a particular statement? I can't. Yes.
Could I have the homework that was due today, like the reflection thing, because I lost that?
You can ask me in class. Okay. So we're looking at the minor premise. The subject is what?
Wait, the subject.
What's the subject of my minor premise?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. And we said that it's a universal negative. So give me what the minor premise is going to be.
No, tomorrow is Tuesday.
No, tomorrow is Tuesday. Okay. Now, let's do a little thinking here. We have what this is a blank E, E. Now, what 2 statements can we eliminate right off the bat here, Sellers?
E and O.
Why not? I mean, why did you choose those? You're right. Why did you choose them?
There's already a negative.
Already negative premise. Can't have 2 negative premises. Okay. Do I have a middle term that's distributed? What's the middle term?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Is it distributed already in at least one premise?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. So that doesn't tell me anything yet. Do I have distributed terms in the conclusion?
Yes.
Is it distributed in my premise?
Yeah.
Tomorrow is, but test day hasn't been yet. So what does that tell me? What type of statement does the major premise have to be, Sellers?
A.
Has to be an A, and what does the subject have to be?
All.
Has to be.
Test day.
All test days are Tuesdays. All test days are Tuesdays. No, tomorrow is Tuesday. No, tomorrow is a test day. So, do we have a valid syllogism? Do I have a distributed middle term in at least one premise? Yes. Do I have a distributed term in the conclusion that's distributed in its premise?
Yes.
Do I have two negative premises? Do I have a negative conclusion with two affirmative premises? So that is valid. Okay? Yeah.
Same one we just.
Yeah. A, E, E2, same one we just did. Yes.
When you're testing for validity, can't you just combine three rules now?
Yeah, which ones?
The last one.
Mhm.
So we could just.
Okay.
I'm just thinking. Good job.
Great. All right, number 2. No enthymemes are complete, so some arguments are incomplete. And Carmichael, while you're thinking out loud, think about this one. What do they give us here? What's the conclusion?
No enthymemes are complete.
All right, we want to try again?
Oh wait, no, so some arguments are.
Some arguments are incomplete. That's my conclusion. But as I look at the conclusion, then I look over at the premise they gave me. What do I need to change about the conclusion?
Well, here's a major
I need to change the major term to what?
to complete.
Complete. So what can I do?
Make it negative. So we say some arguments are not.
Okay, so I need to do an obverse. When you do an obverse, you change the quality and you negate the predicate. So what would that sound like?
Some arguments are not complete.
Yes. Because unreduced, it would say some arguments are not non-incomplete, which reduce to not complete. So some arguments are not complete, but I can't leave complete out here dangling. It's an adjective, so we'll say things. Okay, some arguments are not complete things. So now I know my minor premise, now I know my minor term, and I know my major term. Okay, so Anna, which premise did they give me?
The major.
The major premise. Do I have to do anything to that?
Yes. Well, yeah.
Yeah, just add things. Other than that, no. So no enthymemes are complete things. Okay? So let's take stock of where we are. We have our minor term and our major term, and we have now our middle term, enthymemes. Do I have any distributed? Is the middle term distributed already, Anna? Yes, it is. So that gives me a little freedom here. Do I have any distributed terms in my conclusion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, and it's already distributed there. So now I've got even more wiggle room. What two statements can't the minor premise be?
E and O.
E and O can't have two negative premises. So that means, what can this be?
A or not?
Can be an A or an I. Which one do you want to try first?
I.
Let's try an I. What do I's and E's have in common?
They're.
The subject and the predicate. Remember? Converse. Subject and the predicate. So if we've chosen an I,
Oh yeah, they're both.
if we've chosen an I, which needs to go first? Arguments or enthymemes? Bean Stone whispered, it doesn't matter.
It
Remember?
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So we're going to say some arguments are enthymemes. And now we're going to check for validity. Do I have a distributed middle term in at least one premise, Anna?
Yes, sir.
We do. Do I have a distributed term in the conclusion that's distributed in its premise?
Yes, sir.
Do I have two negative premises? Do I have a negative premise with two affirmative conclusions? Nope. So that is valid. Yes.
Okay, so in the enthymemes, is it always gonna give the major and the conclusion? So it could give the conclusion and the minor?
It can give any two out of the three. So on number 1, it gave the minor and the conclusion. On number 2, it gave the major and the conclusion. On number 3 and 4, some variation thereof. And on number 5, it gives you the major and the minor, but not the conclusion. An enthymeme just means that of the 3 categorical statements that need to make up a categorical syllogism, they only gave you 2. Now, in the real world and in this textbook, almost always someone says their conclusion and one premise and leaves a premise unstated. But technically speaking, they could also leave the conclusion unstated. But for the most part, it's going to be either the major or minor premise that is missing. Bean?
Big thing is one. I finally get why it's E and I that are encounters because it's like none of them are distributed, it's both of them, so it doesn't listen.
There you go. Well done. Good connection.
Also, over the weekend, my brother was watching this video, and there's this one part, and they mentioned like logical syllogism, and the guy gave you a puzzle, and I was able to solve it, and it made me happy. So.
Sense of accomplishment. Way to go. Way to go. Hopefully you embarrassed your brother. Because what have we done logic for if not to show people up, right? I'm just kidding. That's not what we did logic. Please don't hold this against me. All right, number 3, and I'm feeling particularly confident about Jedediah over here. He's so quiet, I feel like he has to know. So Jedediah, some young people are not rebels since not everyone rebels as a teenager. What is the conclusion? Some young people are not rebels. Do I have to do anything to that? Not a thing. All right, so that's my conclusion. Some young people are not rebels. Okay, so now I know my minor term, young people. I know my major term, rebels. What did they give us? They give us the major or the minor premise?
Minor.
They gave us, take a look again. What's the major term?
Major term is rebels.
Okay. And it says not everyone rebels, and they're using that as a verb, but you can very easily make that a noun. So they're giving you the major premise. Okay. They're giving us the major premise. It says not everyone rebels as a teenager. So is that a universal or an affirmative, a universal or particular statement? It's a particular statement. And is it affirmative or is it negative?
Affirmative.
Try again.
And negative.
A negative. Not everyone rebels. So we know this is going to be some blank are not blank, okay? Now, we know this needs to be valid. I have a distributed term in my conclusion that needs to be distributed in its premise. So which one of these does rebels have to go into?
The first one.
Has to go into the predicate, right? Because this is an O statement, and an O, the only distributed term, is the predicate. So it has to go there, okay? It has to go there, which means my middle term is what?
Teenager.
Teenager, or teenagers. Some teenagers are not rebels. Okay, so now I've got all 3 of my terms. I've used rebels twice. My minor premise is going to have young people and teenagers. Let's see what order this needs to be. So I have got an O blank O. We want this to be valid. So it can't be an E or an O. Okay, what about A or I? Which one do you think?
A.
A. Why do you say A?
I don't know.
Well, it's a good guess. What's my middle term?
Teenager.
Teenagers. Is it distributed in the major premise?
No, sir.
So it needs to be distributed in the minor premise. If I've chosen I, which term is distributed in an I statement? Neither of them. Neither of them. Therefore, this has to be an A, and since only the subject of an A is distributed, it has to be all teenagers are young people. Okay? You got to know the rules. Otherwise, this is going to be painful, right? Like, while they're sitting through logic class, painful, right? It's going to be excruciating for you. So I don't want that for you. I want you to actually be able to do this. So make sure you're brushed up on your rules. Is this valid?
Yeah.
Louis Sperry, you'd say yes, it is in fact a valid syllogism. So we've done our job. Okay? Again, we do this out of love. This is an act of love. When someone gives you an argument, don't make it invalid. Make it valid and then defeat it. Okay? Make it valid and then point out that one of their premises is false, but make it valid for them. That's an act of love. Yes. Not yet. Bean?
So that is a good argument because the premises are true, right?
Some teenagers are not rebels. True. All teenagers are young people. True. Therefore, this conclusion has to be valid. Some young people are not rebels. So yes, this would be both valid and sound. This is a good argument. Okay? We would have to affirm. So if I wanted to pick this apart, I would have to either find a vague term. What does it mean to be a rebel? Right? Right, but I'm saying I have to either point out this is a vague term, or I'd have to prove one of these false. Well, what's really difficult to prove this false, to prove this O statement false, what would I have to prove to be true to make this false? Think about your square of opposition. In order to prove some teenagers are not rebels, what statement would have to be true, Bean?
All teenagers are rebels.
All teenagers are rebels. And to poke a hole in that, what do I have to find?
One or two.
One non-rebellious, and then boom, the whole thing blows up, right? So Yeah, that's how we do this. We would either attack, if the form is valid, we have to either attack the terms and say they're vague or poorly defined, or we have to find a flaw in one of the premises. And if we can't do that, we have to accept the conclusion no matter how much we don't want to. Sellers?
Wait, so both premises are true except force the conclusion?
Well, first we check the validity. Remember, a valid syllogism is one in which if both the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true.
Yeah, it's just valid.
Yeah, so if I check the validity and I say it is valid, and I find out that both premises are true, the conclusion's automatically true. Has to be true. Okay, has to be true. All right, let's do 2 more of these, and I'm gonna give you your homework. Most Russians are not capitalists because communists are not capitalists. Guys, Hannah Anderson's gonna crush this one, I can tell, because she's talking to Vale about how confident she is in her ability to do these. So Hannah, what's the conclusion?
Some Russians are not capitalists.
Some Russians are not capitalists. Now, what was the conclusion as it was written?
Most Russians are capitalists.
Most Russians are not capitalists. Hannah recognized that is a particular negative, and the subject is Russians, and the predicate is capitalist. So we would say some Russians are not capitalists. Okay? So they gave me my minor term, they gave me my major term. What premise did they give me? The major or minor premise? Communists are not capitalists. Is that going to be the major or the minor premise?
Major.
It's the major because it has my major term in it. Communists are not capitalists. Is that a universal or particular statement?
Universal.
Universal, affirmative, or negative?
Negative.
Negative. So no what?
Capitalists or communists.
Well, let's.
Or
Is that statement about capitalists or is it about communists? What's the subject of communists are not communists? So no communists are capitalists. No communists are capitalists. So I have got minor term Russians, major term capitalists, minor or middle term communists. So I have an E. What is wrong with this thing? I have an E blank O. Okay, so Hannah, what is my minor premise going to be?
it's gonna be I don't know if it's universal or particular, but it's gonna be a affirmative.
It's going to be an affirmative. Let's see if we can narrow it down a little bit. I've got a distributed term in my conclusion that's already been distributed, and I've got a distributed middle term. So that means this could be an A or an I, and if it could be an A or an I, probably go with an I first. Try an I first. So what would that sound like?
Some Russians are communists.
Yeah, and remember, since this is an I, you could have written some communists are Russians, and that would be logically equivalent. Okay, so now I've got an EIO 1. Is it valid? Spoiler alert, yes, it is. It is valid. Yeah.
If you had, if you know you have a negative premise and you have an affirmative conclusion, you can go ahead and just not even try the minor premise because it's gonna be invalid.
Yeah, I mean, as you're doing this work, as you get more experience, the goal is once you really set up the foundation, then yeah, you can start to skip steps. Like, do you think when Miss Martin does math on her own that she shows all of her work and carries the one? No, she knows how to do it, so she can just kind of get to the end. We make you show the work because we're trying to make sure this process is ingrained in you. So yeah, once you get really good at this bean, then sure, skip to the end. But until then, work it out, and that way you don't skip a step and make a small mistake. All right, Vale is going to do number 5 for us. Okay, so what do the instructions say about number 5?
Number 5 assumes conclusion.
So they give me both premises, and I don't have the conclusion. Okay, so let's take each statement one at a time. Let's not assume that either one is the major or minor premise. Let's just take each statement one at a time. Let's look first, Vale, at God does whatever he pleases. Okay, put that in categorical form for me.
Well, it's a universal affirmative.
Uh-huh.
So the all things he pleases are things God does.
That is exactly right. Okay, you see how we did that? We see the word whatever, and so we know that what comes next has to be the subject, and it says whatever, and so whatever should make us think about things, right? Whenever should say time, whoever should say people, however should say ways or manners, but whatever, that's things. So all things he pleases are, and then we're going to put things on the other side too. All things he pleases are things God does.
Is this the major or minor?
Well, we don't know yet. We got to do the other one next. So, Vale, he is pleased to save sinners. What would that be in categorical form?
He's all or some things he pleases are no.
So he is pleased. That's what we call a definite statement, and all definites gets translated as what type of statement? Or E. They get translated as universals. So we know this is going to be a universal, and it's not negative; it's affirmative. So this is going to be a universal affirmative. So it's going to be all something. What is it going to be?
Well, it's not saying that all the things that he's pleased to do are saving sinners. It's that he is pleased to save all the sinners. So.
Well, let's try it both ways. All things he pleases are the saving of sinners. If that statement was true, that means that literally the only thing that God does is save people. But does God do anything beyond saving people?
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going to have to do it the other way, which would be what?
All saving sinners are things God is pleased to, or
Are things he pleases, right? Because we know this statement is going to show up in there, right? So we know that's going to be our middle term. So this would be all saving of sinners. All saving of sinners is a thing he pleases. So nobody gets saved apart from God pleasing to do it. That's what this is saying. It's not saying that God does nothing but save sinners. It's saying if somebody gets saved, it's because God pleased himself to do it. All right? Now we got to figure out which one's the major, which one's the minor. So first off, it'll probably help us to note that we have two affirmatives. So our conclusion can't be a what?
Negative.
Can't be a negative. Okay? Can't be a negative. So what do we think here? Major, minor. We know the middle term is things he pleases. Vale, what do you think?
It
So-
has to be an affirmative.
Uh-huh.
So the middle term is already distributed, and so is the saving of sinners term. So
Uh-huh.
that means that one would have to be distributed in the conclusion. So it would have to be another A.
It has to be another A, correct? Has to be another A. And this will, I'm not going to call on you, so you can put your hand down. Yeah. So this will also help you guys. Test them out both ways. Remember, A's aren't like E's. You can't just switch the subject and the predicate. So if we try to, we know that this is our, that's a term that has to be in the conclusion, and that's a term that has to be in the conclusion. So the question is, which one comes first? So try it both ways. Would it be true to say, remember, we're trying to make this a good argument. Would it be true to say, all things God does are the saving of sinners? No, because that would mean that, yet again, the only thing that God does is save sinners. So the other way would be what? All saving of sinners is a thing God does. We'll get to that in just 1 second. It's going to be an A, and it's going to be the A that I said.
The premise that says all saving of sinners are things he pleases is the minor term, and the other one is the major term.
So all saving of sinners is a thing God does, is my conclusion, which means that is actually going to be the major premise, and this is the minor premise. All saving of sinners is a thing he pleases, is a thing he pleases.
It can't be an I because the term isn't distributed.
It doesn't have to.
Here's the thing, the book kind of puts itself in handcuffs here. The actual rule that Aristotle said about distributed terms in the premise or conclusion, it actually works the other way. The actual rule is if a term is distributed in the premise, it has to be distributed in the conclusion. You learned it the exact opposite way. So knowing that, I can kind of tip you, because if I chose an I, it would mean I would have distributed terms in my premises that aren't distributed in my conclusion, which is actually a problem. But the way the book taught you, you aren't tipped off to that. So let me just help you out and say the conclusion has to be an A. Okay? All saving of sinners is a thing God does. Yes?
So you're saying that, but it goes both ways. If it's distributed in the complete, it has to be distributed in the premise, and if it's distributed in the premise, it has to be
And
distributed.
vice versa.
What I'm saying is the actual rule, which I think is a better way to teach it, but the book didn't teach it. So I'm telling you this on the day before, like the last week of school. The actual rule is it doesn't go from the conclusion up. It doesn't say, is there a term distributed in the conclusion that is distributed in the premise? It says, is there a distributed term in the premise that isn't distributed in the conclusion? That's what the actual rule is. And the rule we've learned is easier to remember, but it's not foolproof, whereas this way actually is. But don't worry about that. Just know that that is your answer to number 5. Yes? Just one second. Okay, so do we understand how to do our homework tonight? Your homework tonight is page 2. I'll give you the sheet in just a moment. It's page 225, where you're going to do 5 of these from the textbook. They're all from Scripture, but you're going to do the exact same things that you did up here. You feel good about it? Any questions about it? Okay, I'm gonna give you your homework. I want you to put this away immediately, and then I'm gonna come around and give you your test. So read once you get your homework.
This isn't that.
I think